Okay, we should be live.
So start with the liaisons and presenters. Looks like Gail's.
She's frozen, I
Is
think.
she frozen? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So for everyone who's joined us already and anyone who's watching on YouTube, just an announcement that we are here. This is the May 18th Public Design Commission public meeting. And due to emergency executive orders issued by the mayor and the governor in relation to COVID-19, this meeting is being held via teleconference, obviously. And if you're watching via YouTube, you can find a link to the agenda on the website that's in the video description. And for members of the public who have joined via Zoom or plan to call in via testimony to give testimony, I'll call your name when it's the time, and then I'll unmute you. You'll be muted until then, and then please limit your testimony to 3 minutes, which is the standard, and we'll let you know when your time is up. And we are just going to wait because there is a lag here with the live stream. Okay. Rebecca, can you go ahead and share the title screen?
Oh, I just have share screen for the presentations, not for
Oh,
the,
okay, okay.
yeah.
Okay, I think we can go ahead and begin, Signe.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Signe Nielsen, President of the Public Design Commission. The public meeting is now commencing. I'll begin with a roll call to confirm commissioner attendance. When I call your name, if you could please say here. Phil Ahrens,
Here.
Lori Hawkinson,
Here.
Manuel Miranda,
Sorry, one moment.
Here.
Richard Moore,
Here.
Susan Morgenthau,
Here.
Ethel Sheffer,
Here.
Merrill Tisch,
Here.
Mary Valverde.
Here.
Okay, we have a full house. Thank you. We'll now vote on the consent agenda. We have items 27474 to 27503 before us. The staff has noted Commissioner Morgenthau's recusal from item number 27478. Are there any other recusals, abstentions, or no votes? No, let the record show there are no other recusals, abstentions, or no votes. Will someone make a motion to approve the consent agenda with the conditions of approval noted?
So moved. Second.
That was Richard Moore on the first, and who was on the
It
second?
was Phil Ahrens.
Phil, thank you, Phil. So I will now go through another roll call for the vote. When I call your name, please say yes or no to the consent agenda. Phil,
Yes.
obviously. Lori,
Yes.
Manuel,
Yes.
Richard, yes. Susan,
Yes.
Ethel,
Yes.
Merrill,
Yes.
and Mary.
Yes.
And I am voting in favor as well. So let the record show all in favor, and so the consent agenda is approved with the conditions and recusals noted. So now we're moving on to the public hearing with item 27504, construction of flood protection measures as part of South Battery Park City Resiliency Master Plan. Commissioner Morgenthau will be moved to the waiting room as she is recused from this project. So per standard procedures, the applicants will give their presentation, then public testimony will be heard, and then the commission can ask questions, deliberate, and vote.
Hogan from AECOM, I've given you control of the shared presentation screen. Let me know if you see that.
Yep, it looks like it says I have control. I'm just testing it out. There we go. Okay, yep, it works.
Let me just, you have control of my mouse. Let me just mute myself again and then I'll give you control.
Can everyone else see this? It says, please move window away from shared application. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that on your end, Rebecca?
I do not see that.
Rebecca, do you have another window perhaps that's open on your desktop that's in front of the PDF?
No, only the thumbnail of Hogan. Let's see. Let me minimize you and see if that works.
Okay, it's showing on the live stream that there's an issue as well.
Let me stop share and try again.
Okay.
Does that work? Does everyone?
Mm-hmm.
It's good. Okay. And Hogan, do you still have control as well?
I think you have to give it to me again, just as I'm viewing.
One moment. Okay, you should have control now.
Okay, great.
Let me just mute myself and then we are good to.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. My name is Hogan Edelberg. I'm a landscape architect with AECOM. I'm joined today by Jennifer Dudgeon and Gwen Dawson from Battery Park City Authority, as well as my teammates Heather Morgan and Luis Diaz, who are available for the question and answer period as needed. So we have a lot of slides to go through today, so I'll be moving relatively quickly. So apologies for that, but if there's anything we need to come back to, obviously, that's no problem at all. Okay, here we go. So we'll be talking today about the South Battery Park City Resiliency Project. It's part of the Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency overall. You can see its location in relation to Lower Manhattan here on this slide. The South Battery Park City project extends into the Battery here, where it connects to other resiliency projects, the Battery Wharf, and then eventually the Fide Seaport Climate Resilience Master Plan. Zooming in a little bit to the project location, we can see some of the main features here on the Museum of Jewish Heritage, Wagner Park as it is today, Pier A, and the Battery on the right. Our project alignment is shown in blue here, and you can see the tie-in point for the Battery Coastal Resilience Project here. This graphic here shows the DFE that we're going to be designing to, which is the 2050s 100-year flood. That puts us at approximately 14 to 18 feet in elevation, which in relationship to the today's 100-year flood and Hurricane Sandy, you can see it's quite a bit higher than those elevations. So the challenge with this project that we'll be talking about today is how do we design for these risks and how do the community design excellence, climate adaptation coexist in this site. Obviously, there's a lot of factors that go into it. And in response, we've developed these design principles, which are shown here to maximize the protected area, maximize the public space, maintain the design excellence, maintain the views to the waterfront, and provide universal accessibility throughout the whole project. Here you can see the main zones that the project extends through: the Museum of Jewish Heritage in first place, Wagner Park in the center, Pierre Plaza to the south, and then finally in the Battery. And then those areas again in this axonometric view. So the Museum of Jewish Heritage, the largest building, all the way over to the Battery Bikeway and the tip of the Battery Oval where our project terminates. Looking at some of the constraints that we're dealing with subsurface, which drive a lot of the design decisions, there is a relieving platform that runs along the western side of Battery Park City through Wagner Park, just to the west of Museum of Jewish Heritage, and terminates right here at the Pierre Inlet. Through Pierre Plaza, there is an 84-inch combined sewer outfall running here just to the south of the Harbor House, the Battery Park underpass and the underpass vent, and then further to the east, the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel and the MTA Tunnel. And the existing topography, just looking at that quickly, the low point of our project is in Pierre, where we get down to elevation 6. But the location of Wagner Park, which is exposed to this coastal action, drives a lot of the design decisions. As we are looking at the alignment through this area, we're also considering interior drainage. And so you can see here some of the mitigation strategies overlaid quickly, including using black fluid preventions wherever a utility has to cross the proposed flood alignment. And now we get into the preliminary design, and I'll be walking through the site overall and then going through zone by zone. So as I mentioned, the 4 zones that we have, the Museum of Jewish Heritage, Wagner Park, Pierre, and the Battery, are overlaid on the site here. You can see the full design laid in this graphic here. Today, the area we're going to be focusing on here is highlighted in blue, which is the areas in PDC jurisdiction. So first place along the Battery right-of-way, Pierre, and then the improvements or the changes into the Battery Oval. The connections through this area, our design strategy maintains the existing pedestrian and bicycle connections and actually adds new ones in some cases. And so this area to the south of Wagner Park here is a new connection along the Esplanade from Pierre Plaza. We're also maintaining direct connections all the way along Battery Place, either on the sidewalk or through the allays, and creating an open and accessible plaza in Pierre, and aligning the bikeway circulation to connect to the Hudson River Greenway. And I'll be going through all of these in a little bit more detail in zone by zone. Looking at the high level here, the flood risk measures and the DFE that go through the site. So we start with the combination of flip-up deployables and a glass top flood wall in the Museum of Jewish Heritage in first place. Running through Wagner Park, where you can see our DFE is actually the highest. We elevate the park to bury the flood wall underneath it as part of our design principle to maximize the protected area. Running through Pierre Plaza, we're doing a combination of adding flip-up deployables and also increasing the grade, raising the elevation of Pierre Plaza 5 feet above existing grade, and then the final DFE at the top of the deployables is 18.5. And then into the Battery, where we integrate a flood wall into a landscape berm before it terminates here at elevation 15 at the Battery Oval. As part of this project, we're also integrating site security. You can see these areas to the north are going to be part of a separate project by Battery Park City Authority. But along the eastern side of Wagner Park and the northern side of Pier A, we are integrating security elements into the design in the form of K-12 rated walls, planters, and bollards running along the right-of-way. Looking at a high level at some of the materials we're using here from the north to the south. In the Museum of Jewish Heritage in first place, our goal is to really match the existing materials as much as possible. and match the design details as well. In Wagner Park, we are taking inspiration from the existing materials and design details, but adding new materials to develop the design of Wagner Park and integrate influences from the surrounding areas. In Pure Plaza, again, the same strategy, and then looking into the Battery berm, where we are, again, matching the existing materials and the design as much as we can. So looking at sort of the overall materiality of the area, you can see on the left to the right, the bikeway, Pure, Wagner Park, and the Museum of Jewish Heritage. The bikeway goes from a rustic and a more textured look with the Stony Creek granite into Pure, which is a little bit more neutral and granular with the speckling of the hex pavers. Wagner Park, we pick up on this beautiful marbled stone and sort of the smooth transitions, and then into the Museum of Jewish Heritage with these cooler colors and more modern materials. And adding into that palette, we're proposing to add kind of this cooler shade palette, Georgian gray and pearl gray or similar. And we feel like that complements the existing stone in the Battery and that transition to the jet mist, which is used around the Museum of Jewish Heritage. As part of the flood alignments, hydraulic power units will need to be installed. These are showing the ones within the area that we're focusing today. So there's an HPU integrated into a planter in the first place, and there are HPUs in Pure Plaza, and these control the various flip-up gates which are running through this area. This slide here shows the approximate height and width of the HPUs and sort of the things that are going inside it. So they're about 77 inches tall and 34 inches wide. They vary slightly in size depending on the size of the gates and the number of them that they're controlling. And then around this HPU, we're considering using an architectural enclosure, something like a perforated stainless steel with a black color. And that will be continue to be designed in coordination with the other elements on the site. So looking at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in first place, again, its location in the master plan. Some of the existing photos here that we're focusing on here are the planters and the stone planters, which are very lush and add a lot of character to the area. And this entrance plaza to the east of it with the stone fountains. And you can see the allays in the background. The existing conditions here, you can see that plaza we were just looking at on the right here, and then those planters wrapping around into first place. And the proposed design really has a very kind of a light touch in this area. You can see the flip-up deployables that are crossing first place here. And then those continue as the flip-up deployable around the northern side of the museum before transitioning to the glass top flood wall to the left. On the right, the majority of the plaza in front of the Museum of Jewish Heritage remains unchanged, and that temporary vehicle will be replaced with a permanent solution as part of that separate security project I mentioned. So looking at the structural engineering in a little bit more detail, the flip-up gates run across first place and connect into a tie-in point here. This will eventually connect to the West Battery Park City Resiliency Project, but in order to get accreditation for FEMA, we are going to need to put in a temporary alignment here connecting to high ground at this point. The columns that the flip-ups connect to are located outside of the lines of sight. You can see here there's one adjacent to the building here, another adjacent to the Museum of Jewish Heritage here. And those will be screened by planting. And then it connects to the glass top flood wall around to the left, as I mentioned. In terms of the material, some of the planters will need to be reconstructed and realigned ever so slightly as part of this risk reduction. So you can see those are highlighted in red here. Those will be reconstructed with granite to match the existing granite stone that's out there today. And then the surface materials, you'll see this repeated throughout the project. We're using a continuous treatment for the flip-up gates wherever they occur. So where we're disturbing paving, we'll be replacing that with the asphalt hex pavers. Where we have our granite stone, we're replacing that with granite stone to match the existing. And then on the flip-up gates themselves, what we're using is a non-slip powder coating finish, which will be stenciled to match the existing hex pattern that is surrounding the flip-up gates when they're flush to the ground. And we will also use some sort of steel with a black finish, and that's going to be on the side of the columns where the flip-up gates meet when they're exposed. The lighting and signage in this area, again, is remaining very much the same. You can see in the lighter colors, the light poles to remain, and then in darker colors where they need to be relocated. The B shows just the B pole light, and the S shows the B pole light with a security camera. And then these areas here show where wayfinding will be mounted to those light poles as part of the BPA signage master plan. So the palette for first place, you can see the sign here that will be mounted to the B pole, that existing standard pole lighting, and then what it looks like when we have the security camera on that. The preliminary planting palette for the Museum of Jewish Heritage in first place really blends in with what's out there today. It incorporates a native palette, it incorporates salt tolerance, and it embodies the Battery Park City guiding principles for landscape decisions, which really focus on creating habitat and seasonality. Okay, moving a little bit farther south to Wagner Park and Battery Place. The views here, looking north along Battery Place, you can see the allays on the left, and then the view looking south through the allays to Peary Plaza. This aerial view here looks at the intimate gardens in Wagner Park, and there's allays leading into Peary Plaza, and then north along the Esplanade in Wagner Park itself. There's public art in Wagner Park, as I'm sure everyone is familiar with. These pieces will be relocated within the new park design, both the resonating bodies and the ape and cat and the eyes. And looking at some of the design inspiration from Wagner Park, we're really taking cues from the master plan principles, that lawn and the views and the ornamental gardens that are out there today. So you can see in this axon the overall design for Wagner Park with some of the key features called out here. Focusing today on the Battery Place side, we have the Battery Place sidewalk, which is going to be 12 feet wide. And that planted slope leading up to the allays, which do lead you from the Peary Plaza elevation up to the pavilion, and then back down to the eastern side of the Museum of Jewish Heritage. Looking at this in plan, you can see those elevations marked here from the proposed elevation of 11 in Peary Plaza up to the new park level of +20 and back down to +11. We've set those allays back from the right-of-way to provide enough area to create a planted slope here to really effectively screen that wall. And we do have some sections and views to show that. And then created a little overlook point here where we do have that service entrance on the ground level. So you can see here the service entrance. This will be used only by maintenance vehicles being accessed from the sidewalk. Pedestrian circulation does extend straight up over these allays from Peary Plaza to the Museum of Jewish Heritage and connecting to Wagner Park here. We have that new connection from Peary Plaza to Wagner Park in the south here. So that direct connection from the Esplanade to the plaza. And then obviously maintaining that pedestrian access along Battery Place as well. Looking at it in section, you can see here the sidewalk along Battery Place. This is at elevation 9.5. The section cut is on the upper right. That's about 12 feet wide here. We have our planted slope. This varies in width and varies in slope as you move along the street, but it maintains that planted buffer. The allays up to the pavilion and Wagner Park on the left. And looking at the planting palette for this area, this is blending into the Museum of Jewish Heritage in the north and Peary in the south. And it, in addition to the qualities that are listed on this slide, are going to be plants that are appropriate to be used on a slope. So looking at the views here, this view, you can see the key on the upper right is looking south from First Place. The existing elements in the foreground, the fountain, the benches, and the trees. And then in the background, the allays sloping up to the pavilion in the background here. That's going to be at elevation 20. You can see on the left here, that 12-foot sidewalk leading you around to Peoria Plaza, which is maintains that clear access through this area, and that planted slope starting here in the foreground and extending all the way to the background there. The entrance to the lower level of the building is shown here. As I mentioned, that's a service entrance, which is going to be used by staff and maintenance vehicles. There's two entrances to Wagner Park you can see in this view, one in the allays here leading up to the upper level. There's also opportunities to enter through the allays themselves, or you can enter into the northern gardens here, which are more ornamental and intimate. And then another view kind of illustrating this condition from the south in Peoria Plaza looking north. There's a couple elements here I wanted to point out. One is in the foreground, the flip-up gate. This is what it's going to look like when it's flush with that hex paving pattern and the slip knot coating applied to it. This is the flood wall extending out of Wagner Park with that seal plate shown here in the foreground, and that goes underneath the park in the background. The allays slope up with handrails on either side for accessibility to the park level in the background. And as the planted slope on the right gets, as the grade changes more from the park level to Battery Place, we do have a guardrail, which will start roughly here to provide fall protection. The signage elements you can see here on the flood wall, I'll talk in a little bit more detail when we get to the PRA slides. In this case, it'll be welcoming you to Battery Park City. Okay, looking at the Battery and Peoria Plaza together for a second, just some of the existing conditions out there today. And we wanted to show this all together because it really makes sense just to look at these two areas first. So the dark blue is showing our flood alignment running through Peoria Plaza and the Battery and terminating here at the Battery Oval. That's going to be at elevation 18.5. And then the second flood alignment we're dealing with in Peoria Plaza is this +11 alignment, which connects to the Battery Coastal Resilience Project. And that's going to be achieved by elevating the plaza itself. So looking at Peoria Plaza, some of the existing conditions, the Harbor House and the bikeway. Looking at the views back to One World Trade and some of these temporary security elements that have been placed around the perimeter. The existing conditions is a pretty open plaza. There's pedestrian circulation, bicycle circulation, and service vehicles coming into this area. And what our proposed design does is really tries to accommodate all of these circulation elements, maintain that flow, while integrating all of the number of other things that I'll go into more detail in a second. So you can see here, there's a series of gentle sloping pathways and stairs with seating elements integrated into them, providing universal accessibility to every place where we do have seating. There'll be a clear access to Wagner Park in the north and the allays right here, as well as clear direct access to the Battery Place right-of-way shown here. Overlaying the circulation, you can see how some of this stuff works. So as there's two things here to really point out. One, to maintain a clear open plaza and make sure that pedestrian safety is really being considered. We're actually moving the bike circulation all the way to the curb here and separating that. So you can see in the solid blue lines, that means it's a separated cycle track. Here in the dash blue lines, that's where we have a mixing zone. So where the pedestrian circulation and the bicycle circulation crosses. We also have service vehicle circulation coming in to the Esplanade at this location, and the occasional maintenance vehicle that needs to access Peoria Harbor House can do so in this pathway to the south. And we're providing direct access from the upper plaza to the lower plaza in the middle, as well as universal access kind of integrated throughout this whole area using ramps. This slide here just shows some of the main features called out. And the last thing I wanted to point out here is this space here for an emergency vehicle turnaround. We have coordinated with FDNY to provide adequate space for a T-style turnaround for a fire truck or emergency vehicle in the upper plaza. And they've confirmed that that is adequate to access PRA Harbor House. I mean, they don't need access to the lower plaza itself. You can see the grades called out here. So we have a low point of +6 by the Harbor House, moving up to +10 or +11 in the upper plaza, where our flip up gate alignment crosses from east to west. Looking at the universal access and security that runs through this area, this slide has a lot of things going on it, so I'll just walk through each one. Shown in the red squares, these are all the areas where we have companion seating integrated into the design. The areas that are called out as flush just indicate that the wooden terraces are flush with the adjacent paving, hex paving, which is shown in white. We have a view to show that as well. In the cyan here, you can see where the frequent flooding alignment ties in just to the connection to the battery, and where we have our, in the darker blue, our 100-year storm alignment running through with the flip-up gates. On the northern side of PRA Plaza, we do integrate site security into the design features, as I mentioned. So in magenta, we have the wall, which is screened by planting, that transitions into a series of integrated planters into the stairs before we transition to the line of bollards, which protect the bicycle circulation, the hydraulic power units, and are retractable here in red to provide that emergency vehicle access to PRA Plaza, as well as occasional truck access to the battery. Here you can just see the truck access, or the emergency vehicle access, overlaid on the site. So that'll be coming in here from Battery Place through those retractable bollards and turning around in the plaza here. And then the resiliency projects, I think I went over this on a previous slide. Subgrade conditions, really the big one, the main one is this 84-inch combined sewer overflow, which does run through the plaza. That's low enough that it doesn't conflict with the foundations that we need for the flip-up gates and the columns running through the plaza. We've also highlighted here where the root balls and footings for the HPUs will be located. And then materials, this slide is just kind of illustrating the different materials we have on the site. So the hex pavers are pretty ubiquitous throughout the plaza. What's shown in red will be our steps and site walls using the Georgian gray granite. We have our bikeway, the bike path materials coming through here from the battery, which will be maintained as they are today, and then through this protected cycle track to the north of PRA Plaza. And the mixing zone will be indicated in the same way, again, that it is today, showing that that's the area of both pedestrian and bicycle circulation. Those materials that I just talked about, so our hex paving here, the Georgian gray granite for the steps and site walls. There's a couple areas just to the east of the plaza where we will use black granite to match the existing planters where we're tying into those. I'll flip back just to show you right here. That's tying into those black granite pavers right here. Sorry, the black granite planter walls. We are using wood to clad some of the seating and terrace elements. That's going to be a thermally modified white ash. And then the bike path, asphalt pavers, and the mixing zone markings in the bikeway. The last thing I think in terms of the plan we wanted to mention is the historic bulkhead markings that are out there today. We've just overlaid them with the plan. And you can see here that they all sort of culminate right here where we have the flip-up gate. And that's located, I'll mention that flip-up gate is located to provide adequate vehicular access on the dry side of that for deployment, as well as access to Wagner Park. So as a way to recognize these historic features, but not conflict with the design intent, we're proposing to do two things. One is to mark this connection point on the deployable with text and lines patterned with a slipknot coating. And this is an example from Times Square where slipknot was used with text in a similar way. And then where the lines continue through the plaza, use some sort of hex paving plaque or marker to show where that alignment continues. So something that can be both descriptive of what was there, but also work with what needs to happen with the design today. The signage elements we have running through the area, the site include pole-mounted regulatory signage as needed. These would be located on proposed light poles to minimize the amount of vertical elements in the plaza. There's a wayfinding sign in the north here. We have our welcome signage that I showed in that view on the wall here, and the wall that is required to span the Battery Park underpass. And the waterfront public access signage. We're showing it here, and I know there's a question about its location and whether or not it can be moved, and I think that's something we can certainly accommodate. So just looking at those features in our schedule here, the elements from the BPCA signage master plan, it would be one of these regulatory signage, not all of them, depending on what's required out there. And then that wayfinding element on the street side and the waterfront public access signage. Lighting that runs through Peoria Plaza is going to be a combination of B poles shown with the B, the existing light poles along the street with an A, new high mast poles shown here in C, and these light locations are still being massaged as we do our detailed photometric calculations, and integrated strip lighting into some of the seating elements you can see here with the red lines. And the last feature is the wall uplighting via either in-ground fixtures or potentially low bollard elements when we have the walls extend into planting. And you can see here the schedule for these, so the street lights, the B pole, precedent images for what the in-grade lighting might look like. We're actually considering something that's a little bit more continuous and in a trench now for ease of access and maintenance. The embedded LED strip lighting in the seats, and then these high mast poles shown at their correct height of about 35 feet. And what we're studying, which is integrating solar collectors in the shape of a tube onto these, as well as smart pole technology if we have to integrate any security elements. And you can see an overlay of those features here, the light poles with the signs on them here, the welcome signage on the walls here and here being uplit with the in-crowd fixtures, and the LED lighting coming through on the raised seating elements. A couple sections to show you the grade change. The harbor house is on the left at elevation 6.5. We have a middle terrace at elevation 8.5, and then our final upper plaza at elevation 11. That gets us to our what's called the nuisance flooding elevation, and then we have the flip-up gates to get us that final height to the 2050s 100-year flood alignment. And then the sidewalk running down to Battery Place and the separated cycle track on the curb. The second section here showing the exposed flood wall and that stone cladding on the outside. This is this wide area here giving you access to the upper plaza and that separated bike lane on the left with the planting buffer. The flood walls that run through this area, these vertical flood walls, there's a number of elements, and we like to unify these by giving them a consistent treatment. So here's the concept to integrate stone veneer into these vertical features, moving from something that's a little bit more rough and textured, split-faced, indicative of the character of the battery, over to a more polished and sort of more sinuous finish as we get to Wagner Park with a more contemporary language. This elevation isn't exactly to scale, but you can see the heights here go from 9.5, where we have a lower elevation, and then the height of the elements in Peoria Plaza is 7.5 feet, where we have a higher elevation. The flip-up gate, the column design, this is just showing the structural column within with the stone cladding on the outside, and we do have these moments on the columns where we need to integrate a metal surface to get that seal on the flip-up gate itself. Showing how that runs through Peoria Plaza, just an enlargement with the slipknot coating on the gates themselves and the exposed steel with the black finish here, and then running up the sides of the columns. And then this vignette is just showing kind of a little bit of design development of how these will start to shape up. The granite cladding shown in this image here is just representative of the design intent, but it's not the actual cladding that we'll have, that we're intending to have. We will have a combination of different kinds of stones, and then you can see that steel plate on the side here. And then looking at that elevation again, where the signage would be located. So welcome you to the Battery, to Peoria Plaza, and to Battery Park City. And we've worked with the signage consultant who developed a big BPCA signage master plan to integrate the character of that into these signage elements. We're planning on using an inset dimensional sign, something to match some of the other metal elements on the site, a black stainless steel, and insetting that into the stone will reduce opportunities for vandalism and increase its longevity. Looking at the other metal elements out there, we have our bollards running along the perimeter. We intend for these to be a very simple stainless steel circular bollard with a brushed finish to match some of the other bollards that are in Lower Manhattan. And these furnishings running through Peoria Plaza will be thermally modified white ash, as I mentioned. We've been coordinating with manufacturers to ensure that we can steam bend the planks in the radii that we're showing to achieve the design intent. So we do have these planks running lengthwise, and then we integrate skate deterrents either in the form of this precedent image shown here or through the integration of armrests. The furnishings in Peoria Plaza, we're looking at a combination of movable furnishings that can be located as needed, either in the middle terrace or the upper terrace, and then fixed furnishings that are shown as sort of ovals in the plan right now that could either be something like what's shown here, this kind of pebble, or something a little bit more organic and conducive to group seating, like this puzzle bench. In the planting palette in Peoria Plaza, similar to the other areas, it needs to incorporate salt tolerance. This needs to be a little bit hardier, being in the plaza setting, but we really want to integrate planting into Peoria Plaza more than it is today and blend into the Battery as much as possible. This view here, you can see this is taken from the lower plaza with Peoria Harbor House on the left, and the terraced seating and universal access shown in the foreground here. So you can see the middle terrace and the upper terrace in the background with the low ramps running through the plaza and some of the new planting providing shade and opportunities for gathering. This is a shot of the vertical wall that needs to span the Battery Park underpass. That's a big constraint, which requires us to push up the flood risk mitigation strategies in this area. So we have the stone cladding with the Battery signage on the left and Peoria on the right. You can see in this render how it's moving from something a little bit more linear and blockier on the left to something a little bit more sinuous over the course of this wall. And then the flip up gates pick up here in Peoria Plaza and continue as we've shown before. At night, this is just showing the design intent to integrate wall uplighting. Again, as I mentioned, it won't necessarily be dashed like this, but it might be continuous, integrated into a trench, which solves some of the drainage and maintenance issues. Okay, I know I'm over time, so I'll wrap up the Battery pretty quickly here. The Battery, obviously, the existing conditions are very lush, very park-like. We have the bifurcated bike lane running through the northern part. We have our monuments out there today, the Walloon Settlers Memorial and the Alberti Marker. You can see here the existing locations for these. The Walloon Settlers Memorial, we're not going to move. That will remain in place, but we do need to relocate the Alberti Marker from its current location here, and we have a render showing where that will go. So our existing conditions here, the Comfort Station, the underpass vent and the Battery Park underpass on the left, the bifurcated bike lane in the middle here, and then the Alberti Marker, Walloon Settlers Memorial, and the Salvation Army Monument on the north. And the proposed design, this design is doing a couple things. It's maintaining the same relationship of the bike lane to the comfort station. We do have the bike lane split around our flood alignment here. You can see in gray, these walls are the exposed flood walls, and they die into the battery berm. We've added some sinuosity to the berm here, which allows us to integrate larger planting to really maintain that park-like feeling on the northern side of the battery, and get larger trees and shrubs at a safe distance away from the flood elements. And you can see on these next slides here, the circulation. So we do have our bike lane running along on the north and south sides of the flood alignment. The mixing zone here on the left, moving into Perry Plaza and Hudson River Greenway, and giving enough room for anyone who would like to turn around and access the comfort station or go into the battery. This area here has a couple competing interests. We do have both pedestrian and bicycle circulation moving through this area, as well as the occasional truck, which is required to access the battery. We want to maintain a safe condition here and maximize the sight lines as all of these elements are moving through. Just calling out some of the main features. You can see in the gray, like I mentioned, the wall spanning the tunnel and the wall exposed as the berm. Those will be connected by a flip-up gate. The battery berm, in an effort to minimize its footprint, we're proposing a 2-to-1 slope from the top ridge here down to the base. That'll be a stabilized slope. The plantings, as you'll see, have been selected to really provide that stability, as well as the geofibers, which we're mixing into the soil media. And the proposed location for the Alberti marker here, which is going to be within that sort of paving median, in line with the Salvation Army monument up here. The balloon setter's monument is unmoved, as I mentioned. Materiality, the slide is a little bit jarring, but the materials are actually just what's out there today. And the combination of the bike path paving in orange, shown in purple, is the edging, which is a granite block paver, I believe, which is provides kind of a swale condition and prevents that stone dust from migrating onto the bikeway, or in this case, onto the flip-up gate. Where we have blue, this is our sort of turnaround paving, giving people the opportunity to access the other direction. And then shown in cyan is the Stony Creek granite walls, which they currently edge the bikeway and the battery today. We're maintaining that and also adding new Stony Creek granite walls where we need to hold in the base of that berm. So you can see those features here. They're concrete pavers, the stone dust edging, that hex paving, the site walls and the Stony Creek granite, the centerline markings, the mixing zone markings. Basically, what's out there today, we're going to use the same palette and replicate that as much as possible. Okay, so for signage, there's a number of signs out there today. There are the signs integrated into the pavement, which are directional. There are vertical signs, the Manhattan Waterfront Greenway signage, and as well as new signs that we're proposing, the dimensional welcome signage, and relocated park banner signs, which are just being moved slightly to the east to allow for the bikeway to move through this area. You can see what those are here. So the signs that are integrated into the ground plane here, 1- or 2-way signage in that directional symbol, the park banner signs, which are just shifting slightly east, and then those vertical entrance signs at the beginning and end of the bikeway and the Waterfront Greenway signage. In terms of lighting, we're maintaining the existing character. This is showing the proposed lighting, the new B pole lights along the bikeway, providing adequate illumination along that stretch. And the existing street lights along the curb will remain, as well as the B poles in that the paving median. And you can see those features here. And the overlay of all of them together. Okay, almost done, I promise. We have a couple sections just to show you the scale of the berm and that 15-foot offset from the buried flood wall that we're required to maintain. After that point, we can integrate larger planting. We have the westbound bike lane on the left and the eastbound bike lane on the right, moving into the battery, and the comfort station is just beyond. As we travel west, the flood wall becomes partially exposed. We have the bike lanes become a little bit closer. And if you were to go a little bit farther west than this, the wall would be fully exposed. Oops, looking at the planting palette, as I mentioned, salt tolerance is still important. Shallow roots around the flood wall are important, and really integrating into the park-like character of the battery is really lush and seasonal, and we want to maintain that as much as possible. The proposed design, so this view, you can see the Walloon Settlers Monument where it is today, and the new location for the Alberti marker in that paving median. And a view looking west, you can see here the bike lane splitting around the battery berm, the left bikeway traveling down to the conference station, and the right bikeway taking more of a straight shot to Pier A. You can see the B poles here located along the bike paths, and then those low Stony Creek granite walls on the left and on the right holding in the toe of that slope. Looking the other direction, along the northern bikeway, the Walloon Settlers Monument is on the left. And then we have that lush planting in the foreground where we can plant larger trees and shrubs. And then the lower planting moving up to the top of the berm on the right. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Carrie, has anyone signed up to give testimony?
Yes. Hold on one moment. So if you, we do have one person who signed up in advance. That would be Laura Starr. So I'm going to start with her. We have several people who have joined the meeting. So I'll call on them because I'm not sure if they're here for this project or another one. So let me first go to the participants. And please forgive me if it takes a while because we have a lot of people in here. Okay, so Laura, I am going to unmute you now.
Okay. Okay.
Hi.
Hi, good morning, everybody.
And just a reminder, I'm sorry, you have 3 minutes and
Okay.
I'll time you and let you know, okay?
Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you, PDC, for being here and reviewing this impressive and complex project. And thank you, Hogan and AECOM, for your very thorough presentation and also your great response to our comments about getting some daily flood protection at Pier A Plaza and really vastly improving the design there. I'm testifying as a landscape architect and former head designer for the Central Park Conservancy, who has lived in Community Board 1 for over 35 years, and I've participated heavily in the battery's transformation. 25 years ago, the battery was a nondescript landscape of deteriorated paving and undifferentiated lawns. It has been carefully transformed into a richly planted garden oasis for the enjoyment of local residents, workers, and the millions of international visitors who take the Statue of Liberty ferries. The battery was a refuge during 9/11 and a resilient landscape during Superstorm Sandy. Today, in the time of COVID, it is an Eden of Lower Manhattan. It's immersive gardens with plantings by world-renowned plantsman Pete Oldoff of the Highline fame. It's providing a leafy respite for those seeking a place to stroll, bike, and relax. My concern is that the current proposal by the authority is needlessly going to damage this jewel of Lower Manhattan. And the renderings are misleading. Okay, my testimony has different page numbers because I was looking at a different presentation, but let me try to coordinate this. The renderings on page 110 and 11 show, or maybe it's different, whatever, the renderings of the battery. One of them shows like tree limbs dangling in the foreground, and it makes it disguises the fact that there's this 30-foot, 31.5-foot wide berm that's run several blocks long that will not have trees and shrubs on it because the Army Corps prohibits that. It will only have low growing ground cover type plants. And you know, this is where now there are some 24 old shade trees, which is a precious resource in Manhattan in the time of global warming. These big trees will be destroyed. Also, the sections are misleading, the ones on pages 107 and 8. It's almost a geometric trick deployed where the sections are cut at an angle. And so it makes the slopes look more gentle than they are. But in fact, they're quite steep, they're quite abrupt. And it, you know, so it's misleading. The landform would actually be quite compressed. So in short, like this steep and high levee will interrupt the flow of the park experience as it destroys habitat. It's not represented straightforwardly in the proposal. And you know, I'm just going to add, it's easy to say that this is contributing to a kind of parks without border feel because it's like this green landscape, but in fact, it's this very steep levee that is interrupting this whole flow of the park in an important location.
That's 3 minutes. You can quickly wrap it up.
Yeah, okay. The deployable system, I'm also skeptical about. We've been asking for proof that the barriers in their current length will work and whether we only need those few columns at Pire Plaza. That's the other thing. And then lastly, the wall, the cold corporate looking high flood wall seems antithetical to this feeling of a park as a welcoming garden-like oasis. You know, we had asked for different alignments to be studied, the idea of putting a greener, more garden-like wall around the perimeter of the park and leaving the park intact. And we have never seen any alternative studies to that effect. And we would like to see that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Now, if anyone else is in the room, and if you are here to give public testimony for this project, if you can raise your hand, that would be, sorry, Maya. So I'm going to go through and look. I don't see, okay, I do not see a hand raised. I'm just going to unmute the iPhone, who I believe is Gwen Dawson, because she has her hand raised. But I think, Gwen, that's you, correct?
Yes, that's me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, did you just have your hand raised because you wanted me to rename you?
Yes,
Okay, I just wanted to check.
At the very beginning of the meeting.
Okay, I just wanted to check to make sure that I named you correctly. I'm
Yes,
going to put you on mute again. Okay. All right. Again, if anyone from the public, I did see, let's see, there is an iPhone here ending in 0787, for example. Victoria Benatar, Henry Garcia, I think. Okay. I do not see anything. Okay, so Signe, believe we're done with the public testimony if you want to continue the commissioner's discussion.
Sure, thank you very much, both to AECOM and to Laura Starr for your comments. And I'll just start with a few and then perhaps come back later on. Just wanted to say a few words of appreciation of the integration of the flood risk reduction with security measures. And I think moving forward, that is an excellent pairing of two unfortunate needs. The other one is I mean, I wasn't exactly sure whether you are testing the possibility for solar lighting at the high mast poles in Pier A, but if that's the direction, I would highly recommend that you continue to pursue that pretty aggressively, as it is in not only the flood zone, but the nuisance flood zone. So a couple of comments. I know that you're really threading a needle here, and the public testimony indicated concern about the sort of steepness of the berm, of the levee. But there's also, how much space do you provide for other things? And I guess one of my concerns, even though this is a bit west of that levee situation, is the planted buffer between the bikeway and the pedestrian zone at Pier A. It seems to me to be extremely narrow, and it is jammed with the HPUs. I have to believe that the CSO line might have more impact on tree locations. There's light poles, there's signage. Anyway, it seems that should be a rather beefy buffer, but I'm just concerned I saw no dimension. And then following on in that same area, the bollard line does kind of sinuously follow the bikeway as it begins to head east. And then there's the removable section. And then there's this weird, just straight rectilinear. And I'm just wondering why that can't kind of become a little bit more sinuous as it terminates on the east. I think I'll stop there and ask my fellow commissioners if they have any comments.
Lori Hawkinson. Am I echoing, Carrie? No, it's okay.
You're good.
So I had some questions. So also, I think this is a very complex area and you're working with a lot of constraints, obviously, is the name of the game here. And I would too also like to know more about that green in front of the pavilion moving forward, more details about the section through that and understanding that and its relationship to the pavilion as you develop the project. But I wanted to focus on the seating area behind Pier A there, right there. And you're talking about the, so you have an extensive amount. I know this is the trickiest area. It's not, they have a lot of tricky areas, but you have a lot of section here that you're trying to accomplish with seating and circulation and all kinds of fire trucks and various things going on. So I'm just, I would look forward to seeing more detailing, and I know this is preliminary, on all of this seating that you're showing, particularly the wood seating and the way it meets the ground. The one you showed as an example previously that's just a bit north up before you get to the Jewish Heritage Museum is a different design, right? And it's held off the ground. So what you're showing is something that kind of, is basically turned up, right? But the boards are going north-south or horizontally. So I just have a lot of questions about how that's going to hold up over time and be detailed in a way that will last and be elegant, right? Together with this lighting that you're proposing that's underneath it. So it's just, there are a lot of questions about that, from areas that you kind of lie on to areas that you're sitting on. So this is the one, this is the precedent, I guess, and you showed one on an end. There was an end image of one.
This
photo, yeah.
The two images on the left of this slide are the indicative of the proposed design. These are renderings. And I'm not exactly sure which other one you're referring to, but we can flip back and look at it. I think those are great comments, and that's exactly what we've been working through as well. It's just how exactly does that light get integrated into this bench, ensuring that we can have the angles that we want here while maintaining a thickness of the wood to give it durability. I think what we're looking for in this area is a bench that does meet the ground as close as possible. And we're studying right now what it looks like to actually integrate the light a little bit higher up. So it provides a little bit more of a glow and less of a glare, so close to the ground surface. And these will be built around concrete foundations for durability.
But you said you're looking at one that doesn't meet the ground so closely, or does? What I couldn't.
It does. I'm just saying that the image here that we're looking at in the rendering are showing the design intent that we wanted to meet the ground, so that in Peoria Plaza, we don't have any opportunity for people to get underneath the bench. So these will be solid elements.
But when you show the rendering, the wood goes very close to the paving. I mean, and you're going to have water there and things that are coming up in various times in the previous rendering that you just showed, which I know is just an approximation of it, but I mean,
this rendering here?
This rendering, yeah. That is very schematic, I take it.
So this rendering is showing a couple of things. There's the 3 steps in the foreground leading up to the wood terrace, which is sort of the larger wood feature. And then that is flush with the paving behind it. And so that's sort of built into the terracing. And then we have our raised seating elements, which are shown here, and those continue along. So the lighting is only integrated into these raised seating elements. And that would be a little bit off the ground.
Okay, well, I'm just concerned about there's one that's a step and then there's one that's a bench. So they're different, right?
Correct.
And especially the lower one is also very vulnerable right there. So, you know,
yeah.
I mean, I just think you're going to have to be careful about how that gets detailed and how close it gets to the stone. I mean, I know I'm honing in and very specifically on an area, but this has a huge effect on this open area right at Pier A. And how it ends up ultimately looking, because you've got a tremendous amount of this in this area of the project. Okay.
Yep, understood.
Okay, so we now have going to unmute Manuel.
My questions are most related to the signage, and I know there are a lot of elements that are existing that you have to tie together, and there are also new elements that you're adding as well. One thing that would help for the next presentation would be to see a kind of typology of the new elements that are all kind of like on one page, same way that you're showing all the materials for, say, like the materials or for the planting, just because there's a few different types, and it helped to understand the relationship between all of them. And then the other question I have is actually primarily related to these walls. I think showing these in plan would help to understand, the relationship of like how, it's hard for me. I think on page 50, I mean, this is a kind of key sort of elevation too, but it's hard to tell where this is in relationship to, the battery. Like you're only seeing this when you enter, I suppose. So I just wonder what happens when you leave. And then I guess these are the 2 walls on which those signs would appear. So I think on page 50 or 56, something like that, there was a rendering that showed "Welcome to Battery Park City."
Yes. Be here.
So on page, the other ones that you just showed on page 80, 82, those make sense to me in terms of, labeling an amenity that's available to the public. This one, and this is just, I'm raising a concern here. I'm not sure like how to go forward with this, but the fact that it says "Welcome to Battery Park City" and it's on a wall, there seems to be a bit of, I don't know, to me, there's something where it feels like you're entering a kind of like neighborhood or exclusivity, something like that. I know that's probably not the intention, but just the combination of this sort of text, the "Welcome to," and the name of the neighborhood. There's something about this where you're kind of like entering a different zone or entering a kind of like different neighborhood that I'm not sure if it really communicates a kind of like public space as strongly as it could. That could just be the "welcome to" aspect. I'm not really sure, but that's a kind of concern I have. And I think it'd help if there are precedents where neighborhoods are labeled in this way around New York City. I'm not really aware of any other precedents, but there's almost a kind of suburban feel to this where you're entering a kind of like labeled neighborhood. And I just can't think of like another, another precedent that, does the same exact thing. Yeah. It'd also be great to see the master plan that you mentioned too for the signage, because it's interesting to see this, which I think the public testimony referred to. It's a little bit corporate. I mean, I don't mind it on an aesthetic level, but it seems like a very different language from the the more kind of public-oriented wayfinding signage. I don't think it necessarily has to be the same. There seems to be like two different languages here. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, it does. I think that's a really interesting point. I appreciate that a lot. And the design intent obviously is to find a way to make these necessary walls, which obviously we have to have them for obvious reasons. Perform double duty, so add sculptural elements, add wayfinding elements. But I think that's a really astute point about just the way that it reads, and it reads to the public, and something that we'll definitely consider. We did work with the signage designers who put together the master plan for Battery Park City, just in the way that the text on the wall is formatted and is placed, and the font and everything. So it fits within sort of the that palette. But I think it's something we should consider. Just how it reads on the wall and what that message says to people. Yeah.
Now the other, again, page, I think 82, could we look at that again really quickly? The one with the kind of gray elevations.
Oh yeah. Let's see, what was that?
Yeah, I think
this one or this one?
82.
Yeah.
So this to me, the battery in Pier A, it's a little less, it's more clear that that's like labeling amenities, whereas, Battery Park City, it's the name of a neighborhood. Something, it's a little bit different. And I think, it really, it starts to make a statement about identity, I think, of the neighborhood. So that's the point I want to emphasize. So thanks for saying that you'll consider it.
Yeah, definitely. And I know Jenny and Gwen are on the line. I don't know if you'd like to chime in on this one, but it's certainly something that we did discuss with the signage designers, just what this says, and I think we can take back to them. But but I'd like to also give Jenny and Gwen a chance to say something to that if they'd like.
Okay, so we have Ethel Sheffer. I'm going to unmute Ethel.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ethel.
Thanks. I just, in a lay fashion, I do want to support the tenor of the remarks made by Manuel. They're very much about signage, and he was, of course, very detailed about it. But I found that he seemed to me to begin to be articulating the question of what is being defined here. The welcome to Battery Park City. We know the history of Battery Park City, and we know it's, in a way, it's pioneering status. But in terms of what your task is here and what has been occurring and what needs to happen in Lower Manhattan, perhaps this is rebellious, but I think relatively less on the Battery Park City as the particular defining neighborhood as such would be helpful. It's because you're working on resiliency and Pier A and a whole bunch of things and the great changes in Lower Manhattan. So I think that I would only suggest to you that, of course, Battery Park City defined, but it should not continue with what amounts to sometimes, I don't know if it's a neighborhood. It is, but so is the rest of Lower Manhattan. That's what I think we need to be integrating and defining there. And the second thing, which is just a question that is perhaps for you to think about in the future, that is some of the points made in the public comment, which again, I'm uncertain about it, but some of the criticisms or questions about the steepness of the berm, the elimination of a number of mature trees and so on, at least resonated with me. And I would like to perhaps at another time or as you move forward to consider some response to those questions and alternatives.
Okay, thank you, Ethel. Now, do any of our other commissioners have any questions, comments before we move on? I'm looking, I don't see any raised hands.
Can I say one more thing?
Sure.
I just omitted that I wanted to mention about the 80-foot long wall and the 3-part part of it, that it's going from kind of block to sinuous to some kind of bigger sinuousness. So I just would also look forward to the detailing on that, because it's a stone face on a concrete base and they're not actually coursings. So, you know, it sounds like you're trying to create some kind of sleight of hand there in a graphic way, but I would hope, you know, I'm just interested in the materiality of the stone and how that reads and how that detailing and coursing will all be laid out. So as that gets developed. So I hope we're going to see more of that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
definitely.
also, I unmuted Meryl because Meryl's on the phone and I want to give her an opportunity to say something.
I want to associate myself with the comments that Manuel made, but I just didn't want to interrupt.
Okay. Great. And so, Gwen Dawson, I see your hand from Battery Park City Authority. I'm going to unmute you so you can respond.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you again for the opportunity to present this very important project to you. I just wanted to respond briefly to the comments regarding the concerns about the impact at the battery, and to emphasize that we and the AECOM team have spent an enormous amount of time trying to determine the best possible approach here. And I'll emphasize that in this particular area, we worked very closely with New York City Parks and New York City Department of Transportation. And there were certain constraints and guidelines that they provided and that informed the project. And the design that AECOM has come up with, I believe, does a very nice job of trying to navigate those parameters and those guidelines. And I'm certain that if there are additional questions regarding the width of the berms and the steepness of the berms, that AECOM is very willing to provide additional details about that. But I just wanted to add that was the process. And I understand that there are there will be loss of certain trees, and that's certainly regrettable. It is, however, something that AECOM has focused a lot of attention on, what can be provided there, what kind of landscaping can be provided to try to account for that kind of change to the park landscape. But we are certainly willing to continue our discussions and provide any additional design studies or backup that are additional information that you may desire. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just to be one moment, we have, if you're on the phone and your phone number ends in 0787, I do not know who you are, and I'm going to unmute you for a moment in case this is someone who wants to give public testimony.
It's just Jonathan, Kim.
Ah,
okay, it's just Jonathan. No.
Okay,
sorry.
Thanks, Jonathan. Great. Okay, so Signe, I'm going to give it back to you to recap and do the vote.
Thank you. All good comments from the public and my fellow commissioners. I want to just say, since we're talking about requesting some more detail, the one area which I think is still in PDC jurisdiction is the interface of the DOT sidewalk and the pavilion. And you had mentioned in the presentation that that was going to be a service entrance. But if a person wanted to enter that pavilion, they would have had to make the decision at the beginnings of the allées if they're walking along the sidewalk. And I think they ought to have an option to enter into the park or experience that pavilion archway. So anyway, if you could just study that interface of the sidewalk and the service entrance. I didn't quite understand from that rendering whether I'm walking along the sidewalk and I'm looking at like a not very attractive service entrance. I need a little bit more information there. So just to summarize what everyone said, I know the staff takes good notes and relays all of this. I think there is a concern about whether the engineering of the length of the deployables will work at the spacing that you've proposed. I know the issues related to trees and levees, but certainly if there's more possibility for tree planting to compensate for that loss. In addition to Commissioner Hawkinson's concern about seeing more detail on the benches, I have to say that I'm a little concerned about having underbench lighting in the nuisance flooding area. I think that just strikes me as being, not very long-lived. The excellent comments on signage. And so I would say that those would be the conditions upon which we are now setting the stage for a vote.
Signe, sorry, I did want to highlight something you spoke at the top, which was the integration of the security elements into landscape. And we appreciate those efforts, but really want to continue to push for that as well, to have as minimal a boundary condition that incorporates security going forward. We think that you've come a long way, but we hope that it's possible to do more as this project develops. And to underline some of Lori's comments about sort of maintenance and constructability on the seating, but also on some of the stone walls and column cladding, that we really want to make sure that gets a lot of attention going forward. Sorry.
Right, and as long as we're on the security measures, also the bollard termination at the east end of the bikeway. So I'm going to now do a roll call vote, and when you've been called on, please state whether you're approving, rejecting, tabling, or abstaining. So Phil Ahrens.
Yes, I approve.
Okay. Lori Hawkinson. Lori,
I said approve. I don't know.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Now, obviously, the approvals are with the comments that we've made.
Exactly.
Manuel?
Yes.
Richard?
Approve.
Ethel?
Approve. Will we be able to see the response to the comments at any time in the near future?
So,
I'm-
yeah, so we'll summarize, the PDC staff will summarize all of the comments from today into the certificate of approval. And then when the project returns, they'll provide responses to all of the conditions outlined in the certificate, and we'll share those with the commission.
Thank you. And that can approve
with conditions.
Mhm.
Meryl,
Approved.
Mary,
Approved.
and myself approve. So that is,
Sorry, I don't think I was asked yet.
oh, Manuel, sorry.
Approve.
All right, so that is unanimous. So the project is approved with the conditions that were stated, that will be summarized by staff, and we will see the responses as the project moves forward. So now we are moving on to two projects that are going to be shown together but voted on separately. And that is item number 27505, construction of ADA ramps and restoration of the conservatory garden, and item 27506, construction of an ADA ramp at the dairy, both of which are in Central Park. So as I said, this will be a single presentation, but a separate vote on each. And we may or may not have testimony on one or the other or both. So please begin, whomever is presenting for Central Park Conservancy.
Chris Nolan?
Yes, I am transferring over remote control of the presentation. 1 second. So Chris.
I've got. Yes,
okay,
I've got.
Let me just mute myself and then you're good to go.
Thank you. Good morning, commissioners. I'm Chris Nolan, the Chief Landscape Architect with the Central Park Conservancy. I hope everyone is well. I'm here to present the two projects, the work up at the conservatory garden in the northeast corner of the park, and then some accessibility improvements at the dairy, primary visitor center down on the south end of the park. First, the garden. Garden is the park's only formal conservatory garden, is the Central Park's only formal garden. It's on the east side between 103rd Street and 106th Street, immediately adjacent to 5th Avenue. It's not advancing. Just waiting for the Zoom to respond to advance the slide. Again, the park, garden, oh, too many. There, let me just get back to. Okay.
Chris, it is advancing on our, I mean, I can see it advancing. I wonder if your
Oh, really?
connection is perhaps slow
Yeah.
or stalled.
Or maybe you could, right now it's
wait.
on the locator slide. Perhaps you could do the advancing?
We can, Rebecca, can you take it back from him and the control and then do it?
Yeah, that'd be helpful. Thank you. So on the timeline, the site of the garden was originally conceived by Olmsted and Vox as part of an informal arboretum that was never realized, and the landscape actually functioned as a working landscape from the construction of the park through the late 19th century. It was actually a nursery. There were actually greenhouses built. And at the end of the 19th century, in 1899, a conservatory, a public conservatory was constructed. That conservatory was actually very short-lived, and by 1920, in the 1920s, had fallen into significant disrepair. In the mid-1930s, opening up in 1937, the conservatory was demolished and the conservatory garden was constructed. In 1969, there was a major repair project done in the garden, primarily focused on pavement work. The outer path was, the bluestone was removed and replaced with concrete. So from 1969 into the 1970s, the garden's horticulture in particular suffered in the fiscal crisis. And in the early 1980s, the garden was restored by the Central Park Conservancy, an effort really led by our trustee, Lyndon Miller. That project actually primarily focused on the horticultural restoration of the garden. Much of the garden's pavements, infrastructure, site elements, all either date to the original construction or work in the 1969 repair project. If you could advance the slide.
Can you see the slide advancement? It's coming through on our end.
No, it's slow on my side. So I'll actually just, I have a paper copy. I'll go with that. And, so the garden was designed by Gilmore Clark and Betty Sprout, landscape architects. It's designed as a formal garden with 3 central garden rooms in the center of the Italian garden, to the south, the English garden, to the north, the French garden, and up on the west side of the site, a terraced slope up to a pergola with 2 utility buildings flanking it on either side. Those utility buildings are actually remnant and were reconstructed. They were actually in the footprint of elements of the old conservatory. The garden, our proposal is essentially in-kind restoration with some accessibility improvements in the garden to the on the north side, the French garden, which is a sunken garden. It'll include removal, reinstallation, and replacement as necessary of existing bluestone, replacement of the concrete, repair to stairs, the pergola elements, and the infrastructure replacement across the garden. There will be some accessibility improvements in the French garden. It is the only one of the 3 garden rooms that is inaccessible. It is our intent to make it universally accessible. The pergola area to the west side, deeply terraced into the slope, we have determined is infeasible to actually make the pergola accessible through a site intervention, which is the current scope of our project. We'll make that area accessible through interpretation. And as we look to renovate the 2 utility buildings, we will evaluate the ability to create a lift in one of those things, and the potential for that in the near, the midterm future, to make the pergola area accessible. So you could advance the slide. Much of the project will address pavement and drainage work. All of the 3 central garden, 3 garden rooms are paved with bluestone as it was historically. As you can see in the photographs, there's significant drainage problems in the garden. There's very modest pitches between 1 and 1.5%. All of the bluestone is natural cleft. Natural cleft is kind of an inexpensive alternative, a less expensive, I should say, alternative to kind of traditional cut block. It is by nature more prone to delamination, has a variable thickness across its profile. And you can see just through the poor drainage and over time, there's been settlement and displacement, widening joints, lips on either edge, and delamination of the stone. The next slide. You can see in some of the pavement conditions, there's cracking. It is our intent to salvage much of the bluestone as we possibly can. Much of it will need to be replaced. It's either cracked or significantly delaminated as we go through. Pieces will be numbered and put back in place, and we'll do unit placement as necessary. If you could advance the next slide. It's not moving on my end. The concrete pavement along the perimeter. This was once paved in bluestone. The 1969 project actually replaced that, actually removed that bluestone, salvaged some of it to be reinstalled in the central gardens as kind of a repair project, and replaced it with the concrete. you could see there's remnants of about a 15 or so year ago project where we modernized the irrigation system. That pavement is in poor condition, and it is our intent to replace that with the historically documented bluestone. You could advance the next slide. Walls, brick and bluestone coping walls throughout the garden will have repair work done to them. There's some cracks where there's inadequate kind of back drainage behind the walls. Repairs will be made to them. There are some small sections where the walls, particularly this cheek wall along the staircase, which is heaved out, it'll be salvaged as much brick as possible, reconstructed with salvage materials, so it's plumb. Handrails will be added to the steps as required. The next slide. Up on the pergola, again, keeping with much of the project, there will be repair work and replacement in kind is necessary if the extant material is not in suitable condition. The pergola dates to its original construction. It's steel construction, black painted steel. There's significant rust jacking at joints. Members have kind of deteriorated significantly. It is our intent to disassemble the pergola as necessary to replace elements, scrape and paint steel that can be salvaged, and replicate all the detail in kind. I should note that the wisteria that grows up on the pergola will need to be cut back to accommodate this. You can see it's intertwined into the joints. That's an unfortunate reality of making the necessary repairs. Next slide. The bluestone paving along that perimeter pavement, the perimeter circulation around the outside edge. This was the scope of work in the 1969 project. All of the bluestone was removed from the central area around the fountain to the central entrance as you come down from the steps from Fifth Avenue. Some of that was actually salvaged to restore the pavement on the inside. It is our intent to remove all that pavement. Much of the, all of the drainage infrastructure, electrical infrastructure, water infrastructure will actually be modernized and replaced. Using actually a unit paver will actually allow for much more, won't be historically appropriate, but certainly allow for more seamless repair in the future. Next slide. I believe you're looking at just a photograph from the early 1960s, which is photographic evidence of the patterning and existence of that bluestone. We actually have contract documents from the 1969 project where it's well documented that the bluestone was there and removed and replaced. The next slide, please. This brings us to the accessibility improvements in the North Garden, the French Garden. Really, the French Garden, its central element is a sunken area down to some parterres with a kind of beloved Untermeyer fountain. This is probably the most significant change in our project, is to create accessibility into this sunken area. There's about a 24-inch grade change between the outer path and the lower garden area. The area is actually bound and kind of defined by its horticulture, the ilex hedge that goes all the way around, and 4 points of entry. We have to actually manipulate the grades modestly. There's about a 4-inch lowering of the outer path we need to do to create the width of the plant bed's about 22 feet. At 20 inches, we can make an accessible route. The big design decision for us was to make one, some, or all of the points of entry into the garden accessible. It is our proposal to actually make all of them accessible. I'll go through some technical reasons that we actually led to that decision that actually align with our interest in making sure we maintain the kind of symmetry. Each of the entrances into the lower garden area are thank you. Each of the entrances to the lower garden area are defined by horticulture, again, roses on a simple steel trellis with cheek walls to support the steps. As I had mentioned, there's existing about a 24-inch grade change between the outer ring and the lower path. We have to lower that to be 20 inches. That means that these steps cannot actually remain in their existing configuration. We'll actually have to lose a riser. Lose one tread essentially, and then reconfigure the riser ratio so they would not remain as they existing are. That and the idea that the relationship between the handrails would be different. actually led us to the conclusion that we thought to maintain the symmetry to do universal access at all 4 points. Another driver behind that is in fact that not being orthogonal, and there's no relationship between the entrances to the garden space and the entrances into the hedge, all actually led us to the decision that the kind of uniformity of 4 points of access and universal access was the preferable decision. Next slide, please. You can see, just to get into the technical nature, again, from the outer edge of the ilex hedge to the inside curb is about 22 feet at 20 inches. That gives us just about 8%. What that requires us to do, it is our intent to leave the cheek walls, existing cheek walls as they are. The rose repair and the rose trellises is necessary. Extend the cheek walls to the back, which is essentially it's essentially at pavement elevation. Have it drop 12 inches to a small extension of the cheek wall in the front, and create an accessible ramp along its length with handrails on both sides. You can see in the section, it's necessary to actually add these little cheek walls extensions on the low side, which actually will retain the ramp. And again, if we were to, there's no way to leave the existing steps in place without reconfiguration. We felt that from the inner view, looking up and around the slope, the uniformity of the handrails and the uniformity of the treatment and the absolute symmetry of it all, we felt was the right decision to do. The pavement on the inside will be removed and replaced. And just in the interest of complete disclosure of all of the work, the current Untermeyer fountain is actually quite deep. We actually intend on filling it in. There's no change in relationship between the fountain and the outside edge. It's just actually making the fountain less deep. Next slide, please. Across the garden, benches are actually, they're in perfectly fine shape. World's Fair benches, we'll remove them, scrape and paint them, and put them back where they are. There are some missing benches along the access that's parallel to Fifth Avenue. Those will be, it's our intent to replace them with World's Fair benches as they were in the historical drawings. And along the backside, you can advance the next slide. On the backside of the pergola area, there's some unique cast stone benches with wood slats. The backs of those benches, the wood backs, have been lost over time, and it is our intent to put those back in place. The next slide, please. So euonymus, Manhattan euonymus hedge, that is, you can go to the next slide. It is our intent, it is overgrown. It is our intent to remove the ilex hedge. It was added and replace it essentially in its existing condition in kind. And then around the fountain in the English garden, there's a Berber's hedge, doesn't hedge well, is not in particularly good condition. It is our intent to remove and replace that with an ilex hedge, a type of holly. And then lastly, the perimeter fence around the garden, it is our intent. There's a tremendous drainage problem. The garden is essentially built into the slope. Much of the watershed adjacent to an area we refer to as the mount drains down into the garden. You get a sense in the photograph, the amount of erosion. It is our intent to actually, causes all sorts of difficulty in the garden. There's all kind of makeshift repairs where they put plywood to kind of direct the water. It is our intent to remove the fence, take it off site, repair, scrape and paint it, and then reinstall it on a concrete curb just along the back side where the water rushes directly towards the garden itself to direct the water into a swell with new drainage infrastructure. As it steps down the slope and it's not necessary, the existing fence will go back on new concrete piers. Next slide. And just a couple of appendix photographs. You can move through those quickly. The fountain itself will be restored, the conservation work, the bronze is in good shape. There'll be some conservation work across the bottom, and you get a sense of the beautiful color. And horticulture is the primary element of the garden. Okay, that's it on the conservatory garden. The next slide, our work at the dairy. We are currently working on a kind of in-kind core and shell restoration, roofing work, pointing, repair work to the loggia itself. Our project actually creates, is a proposal to create accessible access from the east side of the dairy. The next slide, please. dairy is actually located just below 65th Street Transverse Road on the east side of the park, north of Woolman Rink, and comes in from Grand Army Plaza. There's a primary means of kind of entrance to the park up to Closed East Drive, and our access point is kind of within that dash box. The next slide, please. This is a pretty straightforward project. You can see historically there's a relationship between the wide, basically a 14-foot path that kind of goes down the slope at a slate line grade to the loggia. That loggia was actually lost in time, some point in the first quarter of the 20th century, believe it or was lost. Next slide. The 1980s, early 1980s restoration by the Conservancy and Parks. The big thing in the early restoration of the park was to recreate that dairy. The relationship between that path has essentially remained as it is historically, and the relationship between the width of that path as it meets the loggia is something we gave very careful consideration to. The next slide, please. And again, there's a straight line grade. The path is about 14 feet, and there's a relationship in terms of making it accessible between where the path meets and the relationship of the accessible route to the dairy and that crosswalk up on the Closed East Drive. Next slide, please. It is our proposal to modify the radius of that path, maintain its kind of straight line grade and historic width at 14 feet, relocate the crosswalk a little further south on the Closed East Drive, which, from a grading perspective, actually is important from an accessibility improvement. It also creates, I think, a cleaner geometry between the, as a point of access. That all gives us enough width to create a 60-inch wide accessible path, ramp, I should say, on the north side of the path, separated by a 9-inch curb. You need the curb between those two to essentially modulate the changing grades between the straight line grade of the path and the grade of the ramp, which requires 1 in 12 and landings at 30 feet. We've decided to do a 60-inch or a 5-foot wide ramp that allows for two-way circulation. Given its length and the popular spot, we thought it was important that people be able to move in two directions on the ramp. As you can see, the relationship between the path as it leaves the loggia going up to the drive. Next slide. View of the crosswalk that actually moves slightly to the south. There's some careful grading around these existing trees. The next slide. And the proposal. The crosswalk moves to the south. It's regraded. You can see that there's a 9-inch curb, which is the double line just above the word path. That's a 9-inch curb, which actually allows us to fluctuate the grades between on either side of that, with the landings at 30 feet. The handrail will actually be along that curb, and there'll be a handrail on the other side. I think the sections show it best. The next slide. You can see again, the 9-inch curb allows us to have differentiating grades between one side and the other. The path, the accessible ramp actually moves a bit to the north. We don't, like it was historically, we don't break the plane of the facade of the building with the path. And the handrails outboard of the concrete curb. Next slide, please. There is one existing tree. We actually have to raise the grade to make the whole grades work. There's kind of careful consideration. We can meet the grade right about where it is now with careful consideration giving to curbs on piers to limit excavation and the use of gap graded soils to create that fill to minimize the impact on the trees. Next slide, please. And then lastly, the proposal element is there's a historic reference we found in the 1870s annual report that clearly indicated that the paving underneath the loggia was bluestone banding and brick. In the 1980s restoration, when the loggia was recreated, the fields were not done in brick, but they were done with asphalt hex pavers. Our proposal, next slide, is to replace the hex pavers with brick. We have chosen a herringbone pattern for its kind of non-directional nature. It's actually, there's some precedent for fields of herringbone pattern and bluestone banding up at the upper terrace at Bethesda. And we believe it's, a nice historic restoration of materials. And that is the next slide. And just a detailed grading plan. We're asked for to just indicate how we gave consideration to the grades around those existing trees. And that's everything, I believe.
Thank you. Okay. So now we will sorry, Signe. Signe's going to call public testimony, and
Correct. So, Kara, you're in charge of who signed up.
yes,
So we'll take
I
testimony.
will. Okay, and so we did have. I don't see. We had a couple of people sign up in advance, which was very helpful. And one of them was Mark Diller, but I do not see him in the waiting room. So I am going to go to the next person who signed up. And actually, maybe if there will be a moment, if anyone's watching on YouTube right now and you want to give testimony on either of the two Central Park projects, you can join the meeting now via the Zoom app or by calling in, and the directions are on our website, and they're also in the YouTube description. You'll see a link there. The agenda is also in our description on YouTube. Okay, so I'm going to go next to George Calderado. I believe he is here. I'm going to unmute you now. And George, you have 3 minutes.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. I'm George Calderaro. I'm chair of the Preservation Committee of the New York Metro chapter of the Victorian Society in America. Founded in New York City in 1966, the Victorian Society in America is dedicated to fostering the appreciation and preservation of our 19th century heritage, as well as the early 20th century from 1837 to 1917. Among our activities, the New York chapter actively promotes preservation of the incomparable wealth of 19th and early 20th century historic districts, individual landmarks, interiors, and civic art in New York City. We're particularly grateful for this opportunity to testify, as the Society has not testified at the Public Design Commission in recent memory. Also, significantly, because the Landmarks Preservation Commission no longer hears testimony for its advisory reports on scenic landmarks, we're very concerned that neither we nor our sister preservation organizations, some of whom will be testifying today, have an opportunity to be heard on proposed alterations to our important scenic landmarks. Central Park is a work of landscape architecture of national, indeed global importance. With its collection of historic buildings, bridges, arches, and other structures, it is one of the most significant landmarks in New York City. In order to properly assess the appropriateness of any proposal for alterations in the park, it is essential to understand the original design and history of alterations in the proposed area of work. It's disappointing that this application is accompanied by so little historical information when so much is readily available to the applicant, original plans, early photographs, and so on. We recommend that the Commission require such material in order for applications for work in Central Park to be considered complete, so that members of the public reviewing the work, as well as the commissioners, can make informed judgments that are in the best interest of the long-term stewardship of the park. Regarding these two proposals to improve accessibility to the conservatory garden and the dairy, the conservatory garden is a significant early to mid-century alteration to the park, but unlike so many others of that era, it does no damage to the historic landscape, which was always somewhat utilitarian, consisting of nursery beds and the later greenhouse. Its ornamental garden-esque design is also typical of other limited original garden-esque sections of the park. We recommend that the proposal be modified so that only 2 of the 4 sets of stairs leading to the French garden are altered in a symmetrical fashion. This will provide access while retaining a portion of the historic design with its original gracious stairs. The presentation materials do not explain the location of the perimeter fence to be modified or how much it is being affected. We're concerned about the concrete wall and paving being proposed to control drainage at the fence. This material, especially if white concrete, will be conspicuous and is thus inappropriate in the landscape. The design should incorporate more naturalistic materials and less paved area at the base of the fence. At the dairy, it's unclear what the proposed change would accomplish. We're not provided with information about the current walkway's historic configuration, conformance to ADA standards concerning slope and other conditions, or how the proposed alterations would meet these standards. The starting and end points of the proposed ramp remain at the same elevations as the existing walk. so the overall slope would appear to be unchanged. No landings are shown which are required to meet ADA standards if this is in fact a ramp and not a sloped walk. The 5-foot width is wider than the 3-foot required for a ramp, as has been pointed out. Increasing the width of the already broad paved walk with an expanse of planting, at the expense of planting, unless doing so restores the historic condition, is not appropriate. Widening the walk will make it appear straighter, exactly the wrong thing in a naturalistic park. There's already a fence at the south end of the walk. If this fence is to remain, then incorporating it into a required handrail for a ramp would minimize the introduction of railings. As shown, the proposal would result in 3 parallel fences railings at this one walk, a considerable intrusion into what is meant to be a picturesque landscape. We assume the existing paving under the dairy porch is modern, and the 1870 report noting brick and bluestone pavement is interesting. However, between 1861 and 1871, Olmsted was absent from Central Park and was opposed to many of the design decisions made during that period, which tended to overemphasize architecture. Original paving was typically non-decorative and meant to be a background feature. The existing monotone bluestone and hex pavers may in that respect be more appropriate than contrasting red brick and bluestone. Also, the existing pavement has achieved a nice aged patina. We recommend that additional information on the necessity and historic appropriateness for these alterations at the dairy be provided, along with a redesign to minimize the amount of non-historic pavement and railings. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I let you go over quite a bit. So, sorry. Okay. So I'm gonna, I know it's a little hard, but it looks like we only have 2 more people who have their hands raised. And I do want to note that we did receive so the community board letters and some testimony in advance. And so everything that we received by 10 a.m. on Friday was circulated to the commission members in advance of the meeting today. Okay, so the next person I'm going to call on is Laura Session, Friends of the Upper East Side.
All right.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Laura Sicking, representing Friends of the Upper East Side Historic Districts. Friends commends the Central Park Conservancy's plan to improve the park's accessibility so that one of the most beloved landmarks in our city can be accessible to all. However, Friends Preservation Committee is concerned with the lack of details and historic information shown in this proposal. We believe that without those, both members of the public as well as the Landmarks Preservation Commission were unable to make informed decisions that take into consideration not only accessibility concerns, but also the historic value of this carefully planned landscape. Friends is deeply concerned by the fact that by not requiring that the proposal includes thorough historic research, the Landmarks Preservation Commission is simply deferring to the Public Design Commission to make decisions without taking into consideration the historic character and importance of Central Park. If true, this will set a horrible precedent and jeopardize the wonderful collection of historic structures within scenic landmarks. In regards to the proposal itself, Friends Preservation Committee does not see the need to eliminate all 4 sets of stairs at the conservatory garden, as accessibility can be achieved if only half of them are made into ramps. The lack of information provided prevents the public from understanding how the proposed alterations at the dairy comply with ADA standards. Finally, the proposed herringbone brick pavement, although historic, is incongruent with Olmsted's original vision for the park, where pathways were typically not decorative. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, am I on? Yes. Hello, I'm Simeon Bankoff, Executive Director of the Historic Districts Council, HDCs, the citywide advocate for New York's historic places as part of our ongoing mission for preserving these places and furthering the preservation ethic. We regularly review public proposals affecting historic properties to ensure that their effect will be beneficial and appropriate to the properties in New York City's historic physical character. I actually greatly appreciated this proposal, which was seemingly much more detailed than the one that was shown at the Landmarks Preservation Commission for the advisory report. So many of our concerns, while still need to be addressed, are somewhat ameliorated. We were originally very concerned about aspects of the replacement in kind of the bluestone. I presume that in the actual plans themselves, there is a very detailed map of what shall be retained and what shall be reused, and the bluestone paths being, and the bluestone material being replaced in kind. Our principal concern, we don't have very many concerns about the dairy, though we do share aesthetic concerns with our colleagues about the herringbone, but our principal concern that remains is with the proposed changes in the French garden for accessibility purposes. We wonder if there might not be a more sensitive solution to a complete reworking of a major design element of the space. There already exists a ramp to the north, which does require adjustment to bring it into code, but would seem to satisfy accessibility requirements. The shallow stairs into the central garden are a design element very much of their time from the 1930s, quite like the sunken living rooms of contemporaneous Art Deco apartments, and their wholesale removal will alter the experience of transition within the garden. This particular element of the proposal should be really re-examined and rethought, as it will greatly alter the experience of traveling through this garden in its formality. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so Signe, that is it. I don't see any other hands raised, and I have no one else noted.
Excellent. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
So we will now take comments from or questions from commissioners. I will, again, we can talk about these together, but remember that we're going to vote on them separately. And thank you to the members of the public who offered your testimony. I think with regard, my personal opinion on the conservatory gardens is I really appreciate the replacement of the barberry hedge, which, whether it's a good hedge or not, is a terrible plant. So I appreciate that. I also concur with one of the questions of one of the members of the public, that I didn't see the extent of where that concrete curb would be located for the perimeter fence. I mean, I think I can guess, but it would be good to actually have that clarified, and whether the concrete will be visible from either within the garden or outside of the garden. And I think really the big question that the public raises is whether we are considering 1, 2, 3, or 4 of the ramps. I think Chris Nolan makes a very compelling argument about the symmetry and the fact that the railings, well, that'll be visually apparent. The grading is obviously a big issue here that I think is a subtlety that is perhaps not fully appreciated by the non-landscape architect community, of which I am, in order to reduce the grade change to 20 inches. But I think that's the big question before us on the conservatory gardens. As far as the dairy is concerned, honestly, Chris, to me, the most offending thing is that stupid fire hydrant on the right on the left side as you go down into the dairy. And if there was any way to lower that hydrant or plant it out, I find it highly offensive. I think that from my perspective, what I'm not understanding particularly well, there's a tremendous emphasis historically on the relationship and alignment of the 14-foot wide path to the loggia itself. So by widening the path 5 feet on the north, it is now coming in to kind of a weird gap between the loggia and the dairy. And there's a rock there as well. And I'm not exactly understanding how that is going to be resolved. So personally, I'm speaking for myself, I would appreciate a rendering, a before and after, of what it'll look like going down the slope, and one looking out of the loggia up the slope. Again, being a landscape architect, I fully understand why it is you need this path, that you can't achieve landings on the 14-foot wide path. And so I have no concerns about that. So enough of me, and my fellow commissioners, would someone like to offer comments or questions?
I don't see any raised hands. I'm going to unmute Meryl in case she wants to say anything.
No, I'm ready to vote whenever you guys are ready.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else, any other commissioners have any questions or comments, requests? Okay. As a reminder, you can vote to approve this with conditions, so that if you have any thing you'd like to see, they can always come back.
So if anyone, I do want to hear if anybody would like to see 2 of the stairs retained in the conservatory gardens, or whether you are approving this with all 4 symmetrically altered.
Okay, Signe, I think we're ready to vote. And
okay, so then I will just I'll just summarize what I would like to see more of. Is a drawing of the extent of the curb at the conservatory gardens. I am supportive of the 4 ramps for the reasons of symmetry and the reality of grading to reduce the 4 inches necessary. I certainly support all the other changes and feel that there is sufficient historic data here to feel comfortable with what's being presented. As far as the dairy is concerned, if you could possibly just, I don't know if you can accelerate the images fast enough. I just want to point out this fire hydrant that's obsessing me.
That'll be part of the scope to lower that to the proper grade. It's been
all right, appreciate that.
The thumb minute too long.
There we go. There's the hydrant. There's the hydrant. So if you could provide us with what the intent is of planting at the bottom of the new ramp. So yes, so there's the rock right there on the left. There seems to be some cobblestone. I guess the ramp is coming down, and we'll replace that cobblestone. If we could see a little what the planting proposal is for that gap. What are you going to be looking at as a pedestrian on that ramp would be helpful.
We can take
I don't know what to say. I am not a landscape historian with regard to the paving that's underneath the dairy. There certainly is that language at Bethesda Terrace, under the Bethesda Terrace, elsewhere in the park. I honestly have to leave it up to historians as to what is most appropriate as a paving material. I don't consider it a path, I consider it a place. So while Olmsted wanted more simple materials on paths, this is a place, not a path, in my opinion. All right, so with that said, and those being the conditions, we will now take a vote first on the conservatory gardens. That's item 27505, construction of ADA ramps and restoration of the conservatory garden in Central Park. When I call your name, if you could please say approve, reject, table, or abstain. Phil.
I approve with all four ramps uniformly provided.
Thank you. Lori?
I agree with the same. I approve with the same.
Manuel?
I approve.
Richard?
I approve with the 4 ramps.
Susan?
I approve with the 4 ramps.
Merrill?
Approve.
Thank you. Mary?
Approve with the 4 ramps.
And myself approve. So it is unanimous in favor of the proposal as presented by Central Park Conservancy. We will now move on to vote on item 27506, construction of an ADA ramp at the dairy in Central Park. Again, I will call roll. We've already, or I already have articulated some conditions. Please vote approve, reject, table, or abstain. Phil?
Approve.
Lori?
Approved.
Manuel?
Approve.
Richard?
Approve.
Susan?
Approve.
Merrill?
Approve.
Thank you. Mary?
Approved.
And myself approve. So let the record show that everyone voted in favor of this and it is approved with the conditions noted. So with that, thanks to everyone. The public meeting is adjourned. Thank you for your patience and appreciate our new venue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.